Hello and welcome. I know it's been a while, but I am back, and I'm here to talk about the transits that are happening essentially until the end of the year, from a kind of zoomed out perspective. Today I'm mostly going to be talking about the movement of the outer planets. In astrology, the inner planets kind of dictate how our life goes on a day-to-day basis. It's called mundane astrology. And the outer planets kind of set the scene and are more indicative of larger cultural shifts. And there's been a lot going on with the outer planets lately. If you've watched any of my other videos, you probably have heard me talk about the grand minor trine that's happening between many of the outer planets. So today I'm going to be revisiting that topic and talking about how that's going to kind of unfold until around the end of the year. All of the outer planets, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Jupiter, have ingressed into the new signs, and they're going to be going retrograde. And some of them are going to be retrograding back into the signs that they were before. So like I said, this is indicative of huge cultural shifts, of which we've seen a lot over the past 6 months. So this is kind of a preview as to what is to come, how those transits are going to continue to unfold. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about when talking about these outer planet transits is the full moon that's coming up in Aquarius on August 9th. Now, the last new moon was very significant because it was activating this grand minor trine between Pluto, Saturn and Neptune, and Uranus in Gemini. You can see that it was directly opposite Pluto. And it was around this time, I mean, the news cycles have been very crazy, but it seemed that the energy was just kind of like ramping up. And I had mentioned in a short form forecast that this was kind of the beginning of what is about to unfold in a lot of different ways, because the next full moon, let me just fast forward a couple weeks here. So you can see on this chart, I have the outer planets showing, I have the full moon showing right here, but I also have Mars showing. So the full moon itself is not making angles to any of these outer planets. However, Mars is. And you can see here the celestial bodies that are in red, which are Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune. That means that they are retrograde. So 3 of the outer planets are already retrograde, and about a month after this, Uranus is also going to station retrograde. So we had the new moon on July 24th, activating this little triangle up here. We have the full moon on August 9th, Mars activating this little triangle here. And then on August 23rd, we have another new moon, and that will be activating this triangle as well. And then after that, what's this right here? That's the south node. The sun is going to be moving closer to the south node, and it will be eclipse season. Now, I'm painting this landscape before I explain what any of this means, just to show you that this grand minor trine is implicated in every lunar cycle up until eclipse season. And then we all know what happens during eclipse season, which I'm going to get to later in this video. So the new moon on July 24th was directly opposite Pluto, and it was making this cradle formation. I had mentioned in a TikTok that this was kind of like the inception, the beginning of what I'm kind of calling the beginning of the end. New moons are new beginnings. Not only that, but all of these celestial bodies are in the first or second degree of their signs. And the first few degrees of each sign, that's new, fresh energy, especially when we're talking about outer planets. These transits are very slow. This grand minor trine is not going anywhere anytime soon. It is going to be active up until 2026. And even still after that, there are going to be echoes and reverberations of this energy. And when the lunar cycle, which is kind of a more mundane thing, lines up with these large outer planet transits, it's kind of like the two worlds of, the big picture and the zoomed in coming together. And this cradle formation that we're seeing here was essentially the first indication of that. Now fast forward to this full moon in Aquarius on August 9th. The moon is not implicated in this larger structure here. However, Mars is. Mars, the warrior, the planet of action, aggression, initiation. It is making an exact trine to Uranus. It is making an exact opposition to Saturn and Neptune, and an almost exact trine to Pluto. This is less than 1 degree. It's about 46 inches. So all of these outer planets at the beginning degrees of their signs being aspected by Mars. If the last lunar cycle was the inception of this energy, the kind of like meeting of the two worlds, This lunar cycle is the cycle where action is being taken, where events are happening. Mars moves quickly, it moves aggressively, it takes action. And so things are going to be picking up around this time. This exact trine to Uranus is only going to ignite that fire even more. It might add a little bit of chaos to it, especially with the full moon being in Aquarius, Aquarius being the sign of the people, unilateral power, also being in a same sign conjunction as Pluto moving through Aquarius. The moon can be representative of the people, and the sun over here in Leo in the sign of leadership. Full moons tend to shine light in dark areas. And I think that this chart is indicative of a lot of people kind of waking up and taking action. The other thing about this chart is that Mars is directly opposite Saturn and Neptune. Saturn, often having to do with rules, regulation, authority, opposite argumentative and aggressive Mars. And Mars also being opposite Neptune, our dreams, our ideals, our greater vision of the world. And so something tells me that yes, this full moon is going to be indicative of a lot of action being taken. However, that action might not necessarily be all that organized. Like I said, the involvement of Uranus, there is always an element of chaos. Now, Mars is trine Pluto in Aquarius, and positive aspects between Pluto and Mars, they are very powerful. Pluto does often represent power. I do think that this is going to be a rather ground-rattling full moon. I think that a lot is going to be heating up at this time. I don't necessarily see the pressure being released, because if we flip forward just a few days, Mars will be separating from these angles, but it is still very much making these angles to the outer planets. But the moon will move to join Saturn and Neptune and be opposite Mars, joining this rather tense kite formation, and shortly thereafter making an exact opposition to Mars. I could see this playing out as some sort of clash with the people and authority, some sort of protests. Like I said, all of this seems kind of disorganized and a bit chaotic and honestly quite rather explosive. Mars and Uranus together are very just like explosive energy, especially when Pluto is involved as well. August 8th through 12th are definitely dates that I have my eyes on for major events, especially on the global scale. All of this is to say, this is building up to eclipse season, which is when I think we are really going to be seeing the big events unfold. Partially because that Grand Minor Trine has been activated several times, but also because, as you can see, all of these outer planets on the eclipse on September 7th have stationed retrograde. And when a huge formation in the sky like this, when all of the things that are being aspected are moving backwards, all of those archetypes, all of that symbology is moving backwards. We are revisiting things from the past so that we can eventually begin to move forward again. Part of the reason that I thought it was really important to make this report is because I think a lot of things that are going to be unfolding, especially in the fall, it is going to feel like we are moving backwards. There will be some victories. However, it is going to feel kind of like we are regressing in some ways. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm seeing here in the chart for this full moon lunar eclipse happening on September 7th in Pisces. The moon will be in Pisces conjunct the north node, and the sun will be in Virgo conjunct the south node. The moon and the north node are going to be in a same sign conjunction as Saturn, because Saturn has slowly been retrograding backwards, and it has dipped back into Pisces at this time, sitting at 29 degrees. This isn't a conjunction, but this is a same sign conjunction. As I said before with full moons, and especially on eclipses, they tend to shine light in dark areas. And as you can see, this Grand Minor Trine is still extraordinarily active, and Saturn is still implicated in that. I think with this full moon lunar eclipse, the involvement of Saturn here is very important. But this is the last leg of Saturn in Pisces. Once it stations direct and moves forward, it will move into Aries and it will be there for good. And that will complete the roughly 3-year cycle of Saturn moving through Pisces. And Saturn moving through Pisces in general has a lot to do with dealing with karmic lessons and learning about compassion. You can also see that I put Venus on this chart because it is making an exact quincunx angle to the moon. And a quincunx is a very tense angle. Venus is a benefic, however, on a full moon lunar eclipse, a very harsh angle to the moon indicates some disharmony. And right now, Venus is in Leo, the sign of leadership. The moon, again, can often represent the people. And it's just in this very uncomfortable angle to Venus. giving us a sort of unsettled energy in terms of all things Venusian. Venus represents comfort, it represents luxury, it can represent money and wealth. So this specific configuration on the eclipse, this is just kind of a distasteful angle being made to Venus. If I were to interpret this symbolically, it's like when you've eaten like 20 chocolate chip cookies in a row and you go to eat your 21st and you're like, ugh, like I don't need any more chocolate chip cookies. Actually, they disgust me right now. That's kind of what's happening here with the moon and with Venus. Venus being the chocolate chip cookie, the moon being you. I also just want to mention that the day before this eclipse is when Uranus stations retrograde. In my opinion, Uranus stationing retrograde is an extraordinarily underreported astrological event. It always seems that when Uranus stations retrograde, shit goes down. And because of the nature of this eclipse, because of the nature of the Grand Minor Trine, Saturn retrograding back into Pisces, Uranus stationing retrograde the day before, this is a recipe for a lot of chaos, a lot of disorder. And I don't say that to frighten anyone. We have all survived Uranus stationing retrograde before. We have survived eclipses before. This is the first time in thousands of years that a Grand Minor Trine is going to be happening between all of these planets at the very beginning of these signs. However, I think that all of this happening is indicative of something greater unfolding that we have really yet to see what is in store for us. Like I said, all of these are very long transits. Lunar cycles are mundane transits. And so yes, it is going to feel kind of crazy. These outer planet movements are huge paradigm shifts. And via these lunar cycles, they are being integrated into our lives. So just keep that in mind. In my opinion, the lining up of these lunar cycles to this Grand Minor Trine is really the beginning of change. So let's move on to look at the next eclipse that is happening at 29 degrees Virgo. So yes, this eclipse will be activating this Grand Minor Trine. And this is creating another one of these kites, which is what Mars did in one of the previous lunar cycles. So again, it's just kind of drilling down this message. So I talked a bit about how the first few degrees of a sign are like the beginning, the initiation. It's exciting, it's new energy. Whereas the last degree of a sign is very intense for a different reason, because it is the ending. It's a sort of ultimatum. And it holds a lot of intensity to it. And not only do we have the moon and the sun sitting at 29 degrees, but we also have Mars sitting at 29 degrees Libra, also making angles to all of these outer planets. We also have Venus in Virgo at 2 degrees. It is kind of also making angles to these outer planets, but I would say that Mars is more implicated in this eclipse. And again, Mars, action, aggression. It's making a harsh angle to Pluto, a very harsh angle to Saturn. And when Mars and Saturn come into harsh angle with each other, think of Mars as like the little brother and Saturn as like the big brother, and they're fighting. Saturn is the authority, and Mars is just kind of kicking and screaming. The sun and moon are also directly opposite Saturn. Again, the moon, during lunar cycles, often is representative of the people. Coming into opposition with Saturn, the law, authority, rules, in the final degrees of Pisces. During the eclipse on September 7th and the eclipse on September 21st, I just see a lot of civil disruption. I feel like there are going to be a lot of protests. There are going to be a lot of socio-political issues that come up during this time. Like I had mentioned, Saturn in Pisces has to do with compassion. And with the new moon in the configuration that it's in, opposing both Saturn and Neptune, Neptune being our ideals, our vision of the future, there just seems to be a lot of clash with what's going on in authority, aka Saturn, and our ideals and vision of the future, Neptune, and the people, represented by this new moon. And like I said, Mars is just kind of aggravating all of this. I'm going to look at the next full moon, and I'm probably going to save the forecast for the rest of the year for another video because this video is getting kind of long. But I just wanted to show the chart for the next full moon happening in Aries on October 6th. Because during this full moon, Mercury is the one making the angles to all of the outer planets. And Mercury will be sitting at 0 degrees Scorpio, making a square angle to Pluto, a quincunx angle to Uranus, and another quincunx angle to Neptune. So Mercury in Scorpio, in the sign of death, the occult, sex, secrets. Mercury, the messenger, on a full moon. Again, full moons shine light in dark areas. And if you look right here, you can see that there is an angle between the moon and Pluto. This is called a quindicile. I normally don't count these unless they are less than a degree in aspect. And this is only 46 inches separating, so this is essentially exact. This is a very tense and obsessive angle between essentially the slowest moving planet or celestial body in our solar system, if you don't count Kuiper Belt objects, making this really, really intense angle to the moon. Pluto, Hades, god of the underworld, power, transformation, forced evolution, making a very obsessive quindicile angle to the moon, to the people. Also making a square to Mercury. Also a very intense angle here. This is indicative of hearing news that maybe we don't necessarily want to hear. Hearing something uncomfortable. Secrets being uncovered. Again, Scorpio is the sign of secrets, and Mercury is the messenger. Also, something about this formation is two quincunxes and a sextile equals a yod. So there is a yod formation between Neptune, our ideals, Uranus, the disruptor, the innovator, and Mercury, the messenger. The disruptor and innovator and our ideals and our dreams and our vision of the future are pointing to Mercury, the messenger, who is holding some sort of secret. I'm just going to take everything out of the picture here so you can see this very clearly. A yod is also known as the finger of God. So the two celestial bodies that are in sextile to each other are pointing the finger to whatever the top angle of this isosceles triangle, I guess the bottom angle in this configuration, are pointing to. So for this to happen on a full moon makes this even more significant. This series of lunar cycles is very much a peeling back of the layers. And it is going to happen both very slowly, but also kind of in sudden bursts because of the involvement of Uranus in all of these lunar cycles. Also because it will be eclipse season for two of those lunar cycles. So perhaps after watching that video, you understand why I came back after a long hiatus, because I wanted to give an update as to what the landscape is going to look like over the next few months as these transits begin to unfold. Yes, it is going to be chaotic. However, all of the events that will take place during this time are going to be necessary context for moving forward once all those outer planets retrograde back into the previous signs and then move forward again into their new signs. Specifically, I'm talking about Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. Pluto will not be retrograding back into Capricorn, although it will be retrograding back to 1 degrees Aquarius. We will be revisiting a lot of old themes. We have a lot going on between now and 2026. But as we are trying to envision a better future for ourselves, we have to understand that the old structures that are in place right now need to be broken down in order for the new structures to be built. And that is a lot of what is going to be happening from now into the beginnings of 2026. Up until then, we have this backwards and forwards movement of these outer planets that is going to make it feel like we are on very shaky ground. And I guess I'm here to tell you that that is just part of the plan. That is just a very small piece of a larger picture. And while it might feel like there is a lot of turmoil, there is a lot of disruption, and perhaps a lot of chaos, we are in a time period where we are experiencing transits that we have not experienced in thousands of years. I went through on my astrology software to try to find a point in time when there was a grand minor trine between outer planets like this, at the very beginning of these signs. And I could not find it. I went back, I think, about 2,000 years. And so it will feel like unprecedented times. It will feel kind of crazy. But like I said, the breaking down of old structures is important in order to build new structures. And that is exactly what is happening. So hang in there. I will be here all of the way reporting to you about all of this, as well as giving you some nice pop culture content to distract you. And I assure you, we will get through this together. If you would like to book a reading with me to see how these transits are going to affect your natal chart, there will be a link down below where you can do so. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about these transits. Maybe I can make a video about that. And I will see you next time.